So one of the key things I do as an entrepreneur is I always test, I always try, I keep every opportunity open, test it out, and once it's doable, I go for it, and once it's not doable, I've learned something from it and on. So not every business I've done is a success. More have been a failure than a success. But that's not relevant. Relevant is learning from it, getting up, going on, and just keep on being open-minded and see every opportunity coming by.
I'm curious from your perspective, if the algorithms start taking some of the meaning, some of the impact that we can do as a human, what is left? And how do we protect that?
Well, I think that one of the key elements is to enjoy the company of others. Let's start with that. Either what I always tell to people, for instance, when I teach, and I tell them once a contract is fulfilled and it's closed and everybody is happy, have a freaking closeout dinner. So many people don't have the courtesy at the end of the deal when everything went well to say, hey, we did cool business together. Let's eat a steak. Doesn't need to be a fancy thing or whatever. Fancy restaurants is not for the business. It needs sometimes, but I think you understand that being somewhere where you can actually talk and have a laugh and enjoy the fact that you've done successful business together is something that needs to happen. So that's one. Enjoy company. Usually thinking on a desk is not going to give you the best ideas in the real world. It gives you a concept, which is cool, but the real world needs testing, needs experience, and it needs people that are willing to get their hands dirty and really see what's actually happening. So lawyers that look at the contract as a means of governing the business are governing the wrong thing. The business governs the business. And legal is there to make sure that the risk appetite of the business is translated correctly into legal frameworks and legal talks. It's not the other way around. But that means that for me, good corporate lawyers are actually usually ones that have not been lawyers all of their life, that have spent time in managing departments, being in the business. I like to blend. I really believe in the classical adagium that you should do a lot of different things because that will create something unique and a unique experience. So in order to break the classical thinking, recruitment needs to start thinking differently. We need to start thinking differently on the value of experience versus the value of a certificate. And the last one, what we should do is make sure that everybody in the legal profession every now and then does some work in the business. And not as a lawyer, but start managing a team that is not a lawyer.
Are you ready to learn how to grow your entrepreneurial mindset so that you can not just survive, but thrive now and into the future? This is your show. Welcome to PossibLaw. Let's get into it. Arjen, welcome to PossibLaw. I'm super excited to talk today. I think there's a whole litany of stuff we can get into, but I'm really excited to have you here.
Well, it's a pleasure. It's an honor. So let's kick it off.
It's an honor. I'm not sure if it's an honor to talk to anybody, quite frankly, but thank you for that. You know, I also, as I've spoken to more and more people from all walks of life all over the world, I've learned that, I don't always pronounce names correctly. And I like to make sure they get the opportunity to say it the way it's supposed to sound. It's funny, my name is Salvador, and that seems like a pretty straightforward thing. But growing up in the United States, it was always kind of a weird thing on its own. So I try to appreciate that, and whatever people want to be called, that's what I try. So for the audience, how do we properly pronounce your name?
Thanks a lot. Properly pronunciation is Arjen van Berkum.
Arjen. Okay. Yeah. I don't think that's that difficult. I'm going to work on it, and we'll see how it goes the rest of the podcast. I always like to start these off, even though this is ostensibly an entrepreneurship and business podcast. I personally, and I think the audience likes to get to know my guests beyond the professional, beyond the worker. And so I always like to start these with asking you, what do you like to do when you're not working? Do you have a family? Where do you spend your time outside of work?
Ooh, I spend my time on a lot of things, actually. But first and foremost, I have two magnificent daughters and I have a wonderful girlfriend. And I like to spend time with them, talking about all kinds of stuff, being outside, working in the garden, I can get pretty excited when my youngest one has found out that she can eat raspberries directly from a bush and not from a bucket somewhere from a supermarket. And I like to read. I read a lot, from fiction to non-fiction to things where explosions are rampant to real depth in philosophy. It's kind of keeping my mind busy.
I love that. I have a almost 5-year-old, and she also appreciates it being outside like I do, and also appreciates the permission when I tell her she's allowed to eat random things off of bushes or the ground or whatever it might be. But it's a good learning experience. I always tell her at some point I would like her to be able to understand the outdoors close to as well as I do. You know, how to make a fire, how to set up a tent, how to live outside of these digital existences that I know she is very likely going to immerse herself in even more than I do. And so I love that for your kids. Reading is also close to my heart. When I was a kid, my mom realized she loves to read too. She reads crazy amounts, and she saw that I did. And as a kid, she wanted to like incentivize me a little bit more. And so she told me for every book I read, it didn't matter the book, but every book I read, as long as I wrote a 1-page book report, I would get $1. And we didn't have a ton of money when I were kids, and I don't think she understood that what that would do, because I read like 100 books in the summer, and she's like, oh, okay, well, how about I buy you a bike? Because, you know, we just didn't have the money. But I love the reading thing because I agree with you in the sense that like it lets you open your mind up to all kinds of incredible things. I recently saw you post something about a book you just read, and I'm curious, when you read books and you try to like incorporate that into your life, do you have a way you go about it? Do you try to take notes? I think it's an interesting conversation about how people sort of collect information and then apply it in their life.
Well, there's when I read books, I do three things. One, I let my mind always just wander off based on what I read. I like to think on what the author has written down. So I'm always seeing how can I bring it for myself to the next level, or how can I use it. So that's one thing. The other thing I do is, because I am also a teacher, I really believe in books that open up critical thinking paths. But the only way to open them is actually do something about it. So, for instance, when I recently reread the book about the serendipity, what I did is I actually took my phone and went out there and decided to make 3 pictures that really looked like, hey, this is a serendipity moment for me. This is either connecting the dots or having an open mind or something else. So sometimes I give myself assignments. And the last thing I do is I always look for cool quotes. Things I can use again, or make something for my collective wisdom. I have this book where I write every cool quote I find that I consider to be something for my collective wisdom. I write it down, and it's about this thick of a blank page book. And I'm now approximately halfway, so I'm writing down all the cool stuff I meet, and that's how I actually help myself. And probably the most important thing is always the realization that in most real good non-fiction books, stuff that's being said there should already resonate somewhere, somehow. The book I read on the Anthropocene recently, I had something like, yeah, I'm already doing this, but I could do it better. It's never that you find something that's really new unless you start reading some PhD thesis about AI or something, and then it becomes like, okay, what are they really saying? But yeah, this is how I incorporate knowledge.
I love that. I'm fascinated by the doing of things. I think a lot of people get caught up in the learning part of it, or I have to learn these 15 things before I can do something. And I love that you take action when you are reading to try to conceptualize that and then actually put it into the world. I actually also do a similar thing that you do with quotes, although I do it in a digital format where I have this tool that I highlight and it creates it. But the reason I like it is it gives me this app and it feeds me quotes every day to my phone. And it's beautiful because it gives me this beautiful spaced repetition of learning things, reminder back, and it brings all these things forward that I'm like, you know what? I forgot about that. That is a fantastic piece of knowledge that I can apply to my life. I bet your book would be a fascinating book to go through on all the things you've read. On this idea of doing and acting, I think we're in an interesting age right now also because, and we'll get into the quote unquote the age of AI or what that means, but a lot of people are learning through these chatbots via just asking a question and you get information, which is fantastic, but they're not really applying it to anything. They're letting other tools do the work for them. And it seems to be creating this gap I'm seeing where people seem to have knowledge, but they actually don't because they haven't practiced the actual action. And I'm curious, how have you gotten good about applying your knowledge and putting it into action in the world?
I think everybody has once in a while had an epiphany moment. I got the epiphany moment when I was visiting the Stockholm Business School on a guest lecture tour, and I spoke to one of the professors there, and he talked about me about something he called tacit knowledge. This is years ago. I had never heard of the concept, but he explained to me that only true new knowledge comes from combining several fields together into creating something new. Because if you look at monolithic education, yeah, I know everything about chemics, cool, but then you haven't got a clue on how you could use it in biology. Let's even say where you could use it somewhere else. So I learned from him that combining fields of learning actually gives you a competitive edge, because that competitive edge is about how you can create something unique. And to be honest, as an entrepreneur, I like to make things that are unique because then people can copy me, but they can never be me.
I love the idea of copy me, but never be me. It gives you this unique blend of taking something that maybe somebody else has done, but making it your own. I also love this idea of tacit knowledge because I think one thing that people mistake entrepreneurship for is all about risk, when I actually view it as more about a cross-functional movement of knowledge, ability to take disparate ideas and apply them in a bunch of different ways. And sometimes that has some risk associated with it, but you're really trying to take an idea and put it into the world, and taking different knowledge helps you with that. One of the things that I've always thought I had that was good is because I'm so interested in so many things, a lot of times I take disparate data points that don't seem to have any connection and connect them in the exact way you're talking about. And I think you see that across industry, that there's things that were done in one industry that were old hat, been done for 40 years, and then you apply them into a new industry and they're all of a sudden magical, brand new, right? How have you learned to take that tacit knowledge, those different things, and apply them to your various businesses?
Ooh, I need to take a small step back, because when people talk about risk, I'm at heart a mathematician. When something can happen, 1 minus the chance that it can happen is the chance that it will not happen. So I like to turn things around. So that's starting with risk. I'm an opportunity person. I don't see risk, I see an opportunity that might have a downside. The second thing is, what I've done is I have learned that risk is something ungraspable. I read a brilliant book once by a guy called Craig Bear. It's called Against the Gods. It's a pretty difficult economic book, but it explains the history of risk. And actually, he states that the earliest form of risk management was believing in gods, because there's no explanation, so there might be a reason, so that's a supreme being. But then if we progress as a society and progress as people, then we learn that risk is actually something that can be quantified. And once things can become quantified, you can make educated guesses, and you can understand where to jump and where not to jump. And the other point is with risk or with reward, it's also creating as many opportunities as possible. So one of the other things I like to put as an analogy is, I would never shoot with a sniper gun on a bunch of mosquitoes, because then I might hit one. I like to shoot with a buckshot, with a lot of shrapnel, and then several will fall down. So one of the key things I do as an entrepreneur is I always test, I always try, I keep every opportunity open, test it out, and once it's doable, I go for it, and once it's not doable, I've learned something from it and on. So not every business I've done is a success. More have been a failure than a success. But that's not relevant. Relevant is learning from it, getting up, going on, and just keep on being open-minded and see every opportunity coming by. As my good friend always says in sales, actually the best sales starts when somebody says no. Sales doesn't start when somebody says yes, it starts when somebody says no. Because then there is a conversation to be had.
I love the way you talk about risk. And I want to dive into that actually a little bit, because part of the reason I created this podcast is I think a lot of people view entrepreneurship or an entrepreneurial mindset, a growth mindset, as something difficult, something unattainable in a lot of ways. And lawyers, definitely in the United States, get trained to almost try to eliminate all risk, right? That's why contracts have 8 billion provisions in them. Instead of focusing kind of on the outcome and working backwards, and then also just being willing to test and be willing to fail, quite frankly. And that's one of the things I want our audience, my audience, to learn, lawyers especially, because I think it's really important in this age we're in right now, which is frankly all about experimentation, testing, trying, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't. How did you develop that skill set? How did you learn to be willing to fail? It's a hard thing.
It's probably a hard thing, but I think everybody in every walk of life experience failure somewhere or the other. And I experienced quite a lot of failure in my early years as a teen in education. I was like kicked out of every school because I wasn't the nicest person out there. And it happened because I was freakish bored. So I learned that being bored can give you two different energy paths. It can give you the energy path by being obnoxious and not cool and just trying out everything that is forbidden. Or you can think on how can I really use that? And then it helps if you have a role model nearby. So one of my key role models was my grandfather. He was a political refugee. He fled Austria in the Nazi period, and he built prosthetic legs. And one of the things he did after the Second World War is he founded a company with the sole purpose that everybody of the children of his friends that had died during the war could go to college. And then when the last one finished the education, he just terminated the company because the purpose was gone. And once I was walking with him through a shopping mall, and he was addressed by a guy. And then when he walked away, my grandfather said, he's walking on two of my legs, see him go. That's when I learned you need to have a purpose. You need to have something where you really want to go for, and you really need to understand that entrepreneurship is not about making money. It's about making the maximum difference you can have with the skill set that's given to you. And that's what for me was a very important role model, and let's call it epiphany moment, where I really had something like, okay, I need to do something else. Which meant, by the way, that once I finished the university, I went to work for a bank, of course. Because they offered a shitload of money, let's be honest. But that spirit never went away. So when the moment arose, the credit crunch of 2008, I had this thought, this is the moment. It's all about seizing the opportunity and daring to jump. And this is also what I see when I look at my children. I won't punish them for trying something. Never. I even told my eldest one, I'm perfectly fine. Here you have 2 blank sheets of paper. I put my autograph on it. You can write any letter you want to the school. But if the school calls me, you have a problem. And that worked.
I love it. I'm also trying to figure out ways to raise my daughter to be independent, confident, while still hopefully listening to me sometimes. And while that's not always the easiest thing, I think trying to help her learn a growth mindset, a willingness to try and fail is really important. I think one thing you said right there that was interesting to me is making an impact, finding meaning in what you do can really unlock a lot of insight and focus in your profession. And it's something that I think a lot of people lack. I know a lot of lawyers, for sure in the United States. There's way too many lawyers who are unhappy. And you see that in all kinds of metrics, whether it's drug and alcohol abuse, whether it's just standard how you like your job metrics. And part of that, I think, is that they've gotten roped into this vicious cycle of meaningless, mundane, rote work for no real clear outcome or benefit. And how you find a new way to create impact is for what a lot of lawyers went to law school for. They want to try to impact society in a beneficial way. And using an entrepreneurial mindset to do that, even within the systems they have, I think can be really important. I don't know how you teach that, though. And I know you love teaching. And I know you want to rethink kind of how we grow people, how we teach people, both young people and old. And so I'm curious as your thoughts on teaching in general, our system, and also how do you build that growth mindset, that entrepreneurial mindset in people?
Well, let me first take a small step back to the lawyers. What I tend to see is that people that need to work within a system is that the more they identify with the system, the harder it becomes to get out of the system. And if there's ever something of a system, it's called the way you guys, especially in the US, practice something called common law, which means that there's a framework, but you need to do so much more than people under Roman law would do in Europe, that I see a significant difference in work-life balance, especially in the legal profession between the US and continental Europe. But I also see a totally different way of looking at the role, in the fact that I see that in the US, people actually act as the guardians of the organization. But the real interesting question is, are you really the guardian of the organization? Or are you writing things down because you're afraid that something might happen and you get the blame and yada, yada, yada? So I think that the first step in the growth mindset is don't care. I mean, don't care on the things that might happen as long as they don't backlash on you in a personal way. Yeah, it might backlash you on your reputation, but let's be honest, making mistakes is something completely human. And the best people to hire are actually people that made the mistake. And so an example on how I created my growth mindset. I worked at a very large insurance company somewhere. And whilst there still wasn't a decision of the executive board to do something, I already decided to act on it. Which was not the smartest idea, because then the exco decided not to do it. And I run a significant amount of money over my budget. A significant amount over my budget. And then I had to come to the CEO, and the CEO gave me a pretty stern talking for like 10 minutes. And I was getting smaller and smaller and smaller and thinking, okay, I'm on the way out. And then he opened his desk drawer, and in it was an application for a management development program at a very prestigious institute. And then he looked at me and he said, this education would cost less than the mistake you made. But I think from this mistake, you have learned something very valuable. So I'm not going to fire you, because that would be a waste of talent. Don't ever do that again. And again, this reflects on the power that not only you yourself have on a growth mindset, but you also need to make sure that you are in an environment where you make mistakes, you're not going to get slaughtered over it. So my key advice is, in your first job, it doesn't matter if you're a lawyer, a mathematician, an AI guru, or whatever, go somewhere where you're allowed to mess up. Because if you go to an organization that doesn't allow mistakes, you're not going to learn. The only thing you're going to learn is fear. And fear is one of the emotions you should not have in your life.
I can't tell you how much I love that. I tell people all the time, trying to find employees, co-founders, partners, whatever it might be, that are willing to act before they necessarily ask 100 questions on how to do something is actually pretty difficult. And not everybody does it. And it in our academic system in the United States, it's almost been sort of beaten out of people, right? Like that is not how you're supposed to operate. You are supposed to learn 100 things. You're supposed to ask 100 questions before you act. But it goes back to something you said earlier, which is you usually learn through action and oftentimes through failure. And the people that when you give them an assignment or ask them to go do something or ask them to just go figure something out, and they just start tinkering, start learning, start trying, and then maybe they still come back. It's fine to come back and ask questions, but they've already made an effort, seem to get so much farther than the people who simply wait to be told what to do. And again, that is part of that growth mindset.
There's one thing that I would like to add to that. And this may be something that will come to a surprise to a lot of people. But actually, as a leader, you also need to be functionally lazy. When I tell people to do something, I'm not going to control it. Never. I refuse to control people. Because if I control people, I could have done it myself. And that means that I also accept the fact that sometimes things don't go as I want them to go. Yeah, it happens. That's why can I have a very large span of control and span of attention? Because I completely trust in people to when I give an assignment or I want them to achieve something, that I don't need to give them oversight. I always tell people, you can call me whenever you want, but if you call me for a decision you could have made yourself within your mandate, you have a problem. Because then you're not calling me because you don't know, you're calling me because you want to cover your ass, and I don't want those kind of people in my neighborhood. I don't need them. There's enough people that really want to please you, take care of you, whatever. That's not relevant. The relevancy is get them to act, because then you can leverage on their talent. And that's one of the other things I see, especially in the legal profession all over the place, that the classical model with starting as a junior, becoming an associate, then a partner, then a CLO, whatever, that hampers progress because everything is fit into a very tight structure. So I really believe that every now and then people should be giving a rather vague order with something to achieve, and then let them do it and let them struggle. Struggle is also a part of that entrepreneurial mindset. You need to enjoy the struggle. You need to enjoy the journey. It's not about the destination per se. It's also about the journey. It's not about the win. It's also about the struggle. And if you're able to capture the energy that comes from that, then everything flies for itself. But you need examples. It needs to be told. That's why I always say read, and read more than the few lines that the ChatGPT prompt is going to give you. It's going to give you the condensed version. But actually, you need to have the reading version, which is usually this thick, because then you understand the true nuances behind it. And that means that you need to take a conscious effort in expanding your knowledge and expanding the things you want to experience.
I think that people mistake expertise with knowing a fancy quote or a key idea or a framework instead of the hard work that you don't see in the background of being in the trenches, learning that thing, failing at it over and over time. Whether it's reading or working, it's the context of all the things around it that give you that expertise, not knowing the framework or that key idea. I don't know how to teach that, though. I think that's part of the problem with our education system is it's so structured in such a way of learn this, you have to answer this question on this exam to get this, degree, to get advanced to this certificate, whatever it might be. How do we build that into a system where people get the opportunity to fail more, quite frankly?
Well, there are two things I might add to that. One is maybe a bit crazy, but one of the TV shows I really like is those TV shows where CEOs go back to the shop floor. Hey, you were talking about trenches. It is so often that I meet executives that have no idea what's happening on the shop floor. They make decisions based on Excels, which really doesn't tell the whole story, because usually, and I've been there in the top layer of the financial services industry, it goes in 3 or 4 management layers before it reaches you. So you always get a sanitized, politicized version of something. So if you really want to know something is one, go back to the trenches, as you said. So I believe that one of the key elements in any kind of learning should be in the trenches, but also revisit the trenches. That's one part. The other part is that I think from a recruitment perspective, you should always look for people that have struggled. What I mean with this is probably the best lawyer I ever met was a lady in a wheelchair that did her master's in law in an old university building that has no escalators, with these old buildings from 1800 something. And if you can then finish cum laude after 4 years, I don't have to have any discussion about morality, mentality, and the will to go on, because it's somebody that has strived for adversity. If I would recruit a lawyer and I can choose for somebody that has spent his or her time drinking with the frat boys and girls every evening, or somebody that worked his or her way through college and university, I'll hire the second one. Because those are the people that understand what it's about to be in the trenches. But as long as the average corporate recruiter looks at, were you in the right fraternity? Did you do the right site education? Did you have the right certificate? And doesn't look about, what are you really as a person? What did you experience? Where did you come from? What did you have to face to get here? Then you won't find winners. Winners are the ones that have really fought themselves up on the food chain and started and never forgot what the trenches really are. And that's what I believe. So that's why I always in all my teachings say to people, go back to the shop floor, look on how things are doing. If you're an innovation company and you need to innovate, for instance, on how cleaning is done, maybe what the first thing you should do is just spend 2 weeks being a professional cleaner before you start thinking from a desk what might be the best idea. Usually thinking on a desk is not going to give you the best ideas in the real world. It gives you a concept, which is cool, but the real world needs testing, needs experience, and it needs people that are willing to get their hands dirty and really see what's actually happening. So lawyers that look at the contract as a means of governing the business are governing the wrong thing. The business governs the business. And legal is there to make sure that the risk appetite of the business is translated correctly into legal frameworks and legal talks. It's not the other way around. But that means that for me, good corporate lawyers are actually usually ones that have not been lawyers all of their life, that have spent time in managing departments, being in the business. I like to blend. I really believe in the classical adagium that you should do a lot of different things, because that will create something unique and a unique experience. So in order to break the classical thinking, it's recruitment needs to start thinking differently. We need to start thinking differently on the value of experience versus the value of a certificate. And the last one, what we should do is make sure that everybody in the legal profession every now and then does some work in the business. And not as a lawyer, but start managing a team that is not a lawyer.
If you want to continue building your entrepreneurial mindset and enjoy our content, we would love for you to subscribe, hit the bell, follow along. You can also find us on our Substack, PossibLaw. Abrazos! I was at this summit put on by DHL here in the United States, and their general counsel really wanted to push this idea that in this age of AI, it's a time for a break. It's a time to change how legal works. And one of the things that was so striking to me was that half the lawyers up there were either going to become managers in the business or had just come back from managing a division in the business. And it gave them a whole different kind of clarity, not just in how the business operated, but in how to manage their legal team, what mattered, what didn't. And that gets lost too often. So I love that idea that getting lawyers into the business, embedding them in the business in whatever fashion you can, I think would really help. Because I think too often in contracts, especially in legal and definitely in the United States, the focus is very little on the business and the business outcome and who owns that contract. And it's very much focused on, as you said, trying to govern every possible liability and eventuality into the contract. It actually brings up an interesting idea that I've been working through, which is Palantir is famous for coming up with this idea or using this idea of forward deployed engineers, where they dropped engineers into customers and built tools and learned that business. So they weren't telling them what the software should be. They were building the software that they needed. And now in this new age of AI, what you're seeing is to get these tools to work in a way that really is beneficial, you need a lot of that. You need people to sit next to the end user and really understand what their day looks like and then build functionality out of that. And I'm curious your thoughts on how we bring that to legal teams so that they are more embedded in the business. Is it a cultural shift? Is it learning? Can we teach this?
Yes, we can. There are a few things to say about this, and I'm going to elaborate a bit. So first one is on the technical part. People need to understand what actually, if you use AI, what a large language model is, how it is trained, what are the pros, what are the cons, what it can do, what it cannot do. And all these fancy features out there like automatic redlining and whatever you have, fantastic, but it's always based on certain stuff. And if you don't know what is in there, you risk something that trusting the system, in this case the AI, will give you 90%, but then the 10% that the system missed and you also missed might actually be really dangerous. So that's the first part. The second part has to do with the fact that if you look at the way people work and the way we prioritize and the way we change things, is a lot of us are thinking linear, which means if there's a contract, it goes to person A, who says something, goes to B, goes to C, goes to D. And usually what A changed, actually D might change back. So that will create a problem. So we need to get people to understand that processes are not always linear from A to B to C to D. They can jump around in all kinds of ways, so that actually managing the process is no longer about managing the stage gauges in the process, but it's actually understanding what happened in which part of the process. And because the process becomes interchangeable building blocks, like Lego, you need to have this holistic overview over all the building blocks, which means that people need to start thinking no longer in the process as a fixed thing, but as a fluid thing. And in order to get there, you need to understand how you manage any kind of activity that has multiple people working on a certain activity, making sure that everything that happened during the process is actually captured and not being kicked away. So in this age of AI, one of the critical skills out there is understanding not only how technology works, but also understanding what's the linear part and what's the non-linear part of the process, who did what, where in the process, and which are the safeguards that are there to make sure that the bias, that's automatically with any kind of AI, see what Grok is doing, for instance, then you need to understand it. So that means that you need to be able to run test scenarios and understand the test scenarios. You need to be able to understand what the business is doing, but you also need to understand how they ask questions. And for instance, we can have all this chat about people need to learn how to prompt. But let's be honest, people also need to learn how to ask questions to other people. And maybe we should start with that. We can start with that at the kindergarten. We're not saying to 5-year-olds, here you have fun and ask what you want to know on DeepSeek. We're not going to do that. So as long as we can keep children enthusiastic, able to ask the right questions, then they will be able to ask the right prompts. But what we do is, because in a lot of our educations we teach children, but also adults, how to color within the lines. You need them to understand why there are lines in the first place. And by the way, a pink sky is also beautiful.
I love that analogy. It reminds me of something, as my daughter starts going through the schooling system, there's a lot of, you can't do it that way, you can't do it that way. And she comes home and you get told as a parent, you need to reinforce that. And my wife and I tend to do a lot of that we don't say it's a bunch of bullshit, but what? That's a great sky. Or you can do that. What a classic one is having to learn how to use fork and spoon. She's great at it, right? But I tell the school, like 90% of the world eats with their hands. Why is it so fundamentally bad, right? And they're like, well, and I'm like, okay, well, that's dumb. And I think in learning, we get stuck in these systems that we've been taught in. That is the only right way to do it, versus learning that there's lots of ways you can go about it. And fundamentally, a lot of those other ways, if you think about it, whether you talk about first principles or anything like that, might actually create a better outcome or a better new way to do something that is fundamentally great. And so I think that goes back to this broader concept of experimentation, willing to fail, and frankly, just trying. I think the other key thing I heard on that is critical thinking. Lawyers ostensibly should be very good at this. I mean, we get taught in systems on this idea of critical thinking, on language, on why language matters. Now, that hasn't actually equated to, I think, what people think it will, right? And that's the broader problem with our educational system. But I love that you brought it back to communication. I have a friend, Amy, who was just talking about this. Frankly, AI is just a communication problem. And teaching people how to communicate better actually fundamentally fixes so much of society, let alone business. How do we teach people to communicate better? Have you thought about that? Is that something you teach in your culture, in your business? Is that an educational thing? How do we do that?
Well, I think it starts with creating your own identity. And creating your own identity starts not with what you say or what you think, but it starts with how you look. Classical example, I always wear these things.
You do. I've never seen you not in them.
And the funny thing is, once you have found your own style of presence, then people start to recognize the first part of communication, which is a unified body language. So I started years ago with having a unified body language. The second thing is, and this also, and all this stuff always happens by chance, by the way, because I'm a pretty big person and I used to wear belts. And then one day somebody says to me, hey, with your type of belly, wearing a belt always flips your pants around, start wearing these things. And then I started wearing them. And then like 2 years later, somebody said, yeah, you're this guy. I know you. You spoke there. You had that suspensors. And then I thought, this is something. So this is not something I learned from a book. This is just basic being open, doing something, and it resonates somewhere else. Serendipity to the max. The second part is, once you have your uniform body language and your uniform presence, is never lose your temper. I can get furious. I really can get furious on things. But I always realize that getting mad is not going to change it, because time travel only exists forward and not backward. The only time travel backward is trying to rewrite history, and that usually can only be done if you've won a terrible war. Well, I'm not of the warmongering type, so going backwards in time cannot change it. Why bother? Learn from it and push on. So that's the second part. Don't look back, always look forward. Don't get mad. See it, everything that happens. If you miss the deal, it's an opportunity. If you experience something that's not cool, it's an opportunity. Always turn it around. So that's the second part. The third part is actually enjoy communicating as much as possible, which means that if you have stage fright, which a lot of people have, take a course, because you can get over it. Public speaking is something you can learn. Do it. but also simple things like how to act, for instance, at a reception. How can you meet everybody at a reception without people feeling, hey, there's this guy coming to stand at my table. Why are you coming at the table? Find your own way around it. So understand these basic kind of skills. And then last but not least, always try to be respectful, but very open. So I never try to beat around the bush. When it's bad, I'll probably say this is bad, but what did you learn from it? How can we push on? What is the step we're going to take so people actually feel safe? So that is all parts of communication, and it all means that you need to test it out. What language works, what language doesn't work, what the audience you're addressing. Always think about the other. Don't think about your message. Think about the receptor, and then think how you can tweak your message. And those are key elements that you need to understand. And these are one of the other worries I have with a lot of this AI generated content out there, that a lot of it is actually not tweaked to either the messenger or the receiver. It's tweaked to the tool. And you tend to see pretty quickly where it's losing the personal touch. And that's what I really look for, and I think people should strive for, is find your own unique voice and your unique thing, and then it goes happen. And the way to do it, again, try, and ask for feedback. Probably the most important thing out there. How did I do? And then when somebody's saying, yeah, it went pretty well. Well, pretty well is something like, you could have done better. Okay. Pretty well. Okay. So that's a 7. How could have made it a 9? And be open. And then somebody starts like stuttering and you say, well, I can handle it. Give it. It also means good communication means that you need to be open for feedback yourself and never take it personal, because it's not personal. Especially when you ask for feedback, it's not personal, it's a gift.
I talk about transparency, which is a lot of what you're talking about, as being kind, that people mistake lying or coloring what they want to say as kind as a way to make it easier, when in fact being kind is, and again, in a constructive manner, telling people what you actually think. And it can be bad sometimes. It can be great, but you are kind in being transparent. And I think communication, oftentimes in business and in personal, quite frankly, gets lost in the niceties of life, of trying to protect whatever perceived okay of society is, instead of being just frankly kind and telling people what you actually think. And the feedback thing is very difficult for people old to young to get used to. But when you unlock that piece of your ability to ask for feedback, wow, the ability to grow is exponential. Because frankly, the only way you know whether you did something well or not is how it's perceived by others. And when they give you that information, it's such a great thing. And so I've tried to learn over time that getting feedback is everything. Customer feedback, friend feedback, and asking for it all the time. One of my mentors, he loved to do what he called a hot wash, right? After everything, he would ask, what did we do well? What did we do bad? What can we do better, right? And you get in this habit of it, and all of a sudden, it's an unlock. And so I love that as being part of communication, is learning is really important. As we have progressed in this conversation, we've touched on a lot of different parts of kind of what is going on in the world and how we learn and how we do better at business. I want to focus a little bit on the AI, the technology, the legal and contractual piece of this, because I think it's something that in both of our lives we see a lot of. And you touched on one piece of it, which is, for instance, AI contract redlining and how it generates a red line of your playbook and all the rest of it to fast forward information. But where I would like to start is a little bit more of at a macro level of how you think the current age of AI is any different or the same as kind of the thing that's been running through the thread of software for the last, I don't know how long, right? Because for me, a lot of what you hear now, workflows, agents, process automation. It's pretty much the same thing that we heard 10 years ago with a new flavor of a large language model layered into it. And so I'm just curious what your perspective is of where we sit.
I think that there's a difference between where we sit from a social dimension and from a technology dimension. What we have seen is over the last 30 years a gradual shift from scientific-based acknowledged truth to, let's call it social media opinion-based truth. That's a social development. That's not a technological development. It was enabled by technology, like the Facebooks, etc. of this world, but in effect it's a social development where the me space has become so large that it actually has become a we space. That being said, that means that the way we actually use technology, we're using it in a fundamentally different way to manage stuff on all kinds of levels, purely based on perception, reputation, which are rather difficult to grasp measurable concepts. But that's the way society is developing. And it has a lot to do with trust and what can you trust and all those elements that go with it. Now, if you look on a technology level, actually what we are seeing here is a culmination of, I think, 40 years of technology development, from neural networks to RPA to whatever you want to call it, into something that's now blending stuff. But the thing is that all of the things we blend are on a technology level still based on the fact that information somewhere gathered in the past should give us an insight into the future. That's data science at its core. And the thing is that usually in the short term, it might very well add up. In the long term, it becomes much more difficult. And if you put these two together, in the social space, it's about short term. In the technology space, it's about the short term. So if you would put them as two axes, there's this quadrant social long-term and technology long-term that's completely being ignored at the moment. And ignoring that part means that we're doing shareholder value-driven investments, research is being funneled into short-term business models. But are we really looking at what the impact is in the long run? What is going to happen? I mean, we've talked a bit about the future of education. Well, let's be honest. Education systems, like every government systems, are very hard to change. Every of these rule sets are pretty difficult because not only the power of we've been always doing that way is significant, but also the system itself is inert to change. So what you tend to see, if we are unable to formulate a long-term objective, both social and technology-wise, we're going to end up in big problems as a species. And on a technology level, as long as the technology is focused on the rat race of creating the best AI based upon past data, and we're not putting a lot of attention into actually the foresight part that it might give us, then what we're going to see is brilliant stuff for everything short term. But my big worry is what's going to happen with technology in the long term, how it's going to make our lives easier. Oh yes, self-driving cars, fantastic. But is that really relevant? It's going to make a few cab drivers obsolete. It might change the way we think on owning a car versus being able to transport ourselves. Yes, that is a change, but is that really the big change out there? Is the big change out there really these kind of AI models that based on all kinds of things they have scraped from the internet and all kinds of databases where we have no clue what they really did? Is that actually capturing the right value? I think that the next step in technology, which we will see, but I've seen some things, but it's not that much there yet, is actually algorithms that can unwind the algorithm. And that's tooling that can actually tell you in a neutral way where the potential biases of another system are, which means a system cannot control itself because it's biased. Therefore, you need other systems that will check the bias. And That's where the real interesting field of play is going to be in our field, the field of contracts and contract lifecycle management. It's about that combined with the fact that it's no longer going to be about what we bought or what we sold, but in the end game, it's about did we achieve what we wanted to achieve? And that requires different technology than we have today. And as long as we keep on thinking transactional and developing systems that are based on transactional agreements, then we will get stuck. And in the case of transparency, it will become, the best way to put it, probably really boring to be in business, because if the AI negotiates with the AI, then what are we still doing? And who's going to check what? And how are we going to make sure that that clause on page 95 in the right bottom corner actually isn't a problem, yes or no? And who's going to find that? So for me, technology is at a pivotal point, but not from the technology level per se, but more from the social dimensions feeding the way technology innovates at this moment in time. And a lot of it has to do with the financial drivers behind it. And the other one has to do with the political, societal drivers behind it and the way we are looking at information as a species. And that makes it pretty hard to do a real prediction. However, if there's one prediction I want to make, is that in here we're going to see blend of things. So we're going to see more blend between the physical world and the digital world. It started with digital twinning in the IoT space, but it's going to become an organizational structure, an organizational approach, running things as a digital twin. And therefore, AI is not going to be artificial intelligence. It's going to end up as augmented intelligence.
A lot of that is really interesting insights into how the current systems are operating. And I think it goes to an idea that I know you've talked about that I think is very critical, which is the lack or the failure of society to continue to build relationships, community in the world. As we move more digital, we've somehow gained less ability to interact with people in a human manner and more willingness, therefore, to offload decisions and actions to algorithms, which has created fundamental problems both in contractual stuff, right? Instead of picking up the phone and calling your counterpart and just saying, hey, what's going on with this? Can we figure out a solution here? It just falls back on what does the contract say? File the lawsuit, do the thing. But also the other part of it that I thought that was interesting that you brought up there was, you know, as we hand off more to algorithms, it is a question long term. What do humans do, right? And I know the Sam Altmans of the world love to say things like, well, we're all going to become poets, or we're all going to be happy doing all these things. I'm not sure that's true. I'm curious from your perspective, if the algorithms start taking some of the meaning, some of the impact that we can do as a human, what is left, and how do we protect that?
Well, I think that one of the key elements is to enjoy the company of others. Let's start with that. Either what I always tell to people, for instance, when I teach, and I tell them once a contract is fulfilled and it's closed and everybody is happy, have a freaking closeout dinner. So many people don't have the courtesy at the end of the deal when everything went well to say, hey, we did cool business together. Let's eat a steak. Doesn't need to be a fancy thing or whatever. Fancy restaurants is not for the business. It needs sometimes, but I think you understand that being somewhere where you can actually talk and have a laugh and enjoy the fact that you've done successful business together is something that needs to happen. So that's one. Enjoy company. The second thing is understand that there's a fundamental relation in any kind of business relation related to this. The lousier you are at demand management in the contract creation, the more you need to have from the relation in the execution, because you need more change. So that means that if you're in a company that's lousy in setting requirements, you know one thing for sure, you're going to end up with a lot of changes. And if you have a counterpart that isn't willing to change or always send a big bill, you have a problem, and the only way to make sure that doesn't happen is in the sourcing process, but also in the contract management process. Think on the relationship you want to have. So sometimes contract management, take out the R, it becomes contact management. So there's a direct correlation between requirements maturity and the relationship you need. The third thing you think I need to really think on, actually in the space we're working on, is to actually don't always do anything via Teams. Every once in a while, not doing a Teams, but having the classical physical meeting actually helps understand capturing where the real issue is. Because a screen won't tell you the total body language. So you need to understand that if you're in difficult negotiations, where it's hard to understand why your counterpart is doing difficult on certain clauses, you're not going to find that out via mail. You're not going to find it out via Teams. You're going to find it out because you sit together and ask, when walking to the coffee machine, the question, why are you guys so difficult on this? And then you get your answer. And then you can start working on the solution. So understanding that relationship and communication is vital to overcome hindrance. And you can have any kind of change clause, you can any kind of procedure in there. In the end of the day, when a black swan happens, and it happens a lot more than everybody thinks, by the way, also a good book to read, then you need to understand that the more it's likely to happen, the more it's likely that you need your business ecosystem to be able to adapt with you. And adaptation is not something you can capture in a clause. It will only capture the process of adaptation, but it won't capture the yes, no, or anything about it. So it starts with understanding this. And vital in this is also that people that manage departments actually stop using the corner office and be out there. I think one of the best things of open space thinking is that actually having a senior leadership just working on the shop floor actually works fantastic. But it means the right behavior, the right setting. And will we become all poets like Sam Altman is saying? No, because who's going to pay the poet? Yeah, let's be honest. I mean, I love poetry, I love paintings, but there is a time when the walls in my house are full with paintings. And then what I need to do, throw them away like a continuous consumption? Or am I going to be saying to the next artist, sorry, my house is already filled. I have enough poetry in my shelves. This is not going to work. I believe that in the end, we all need some kind of human relation in the moments where things are going bad. And if you're a firefighter, when things are going bad, you know what's happening. But if you're a lawyer and you know things are going bad, you actually need to start acting like a firefighter. And what's the most important thing of a firefighter is trust your body. And the only way you trust your body is by being drunk at the firehouse, by having grilled together and having experienced each. It's not for nothing that in the military, in police, in the fire departments, social engagement in the community is actually very much stimulated. It's so logical for firemen to know which children their buddies have, because that's one of the things that will give you the extra energy when it really goes bad. It's not for naught that in the most trained military organizations, the family part is so important. It's not only just the group, like a SEAL team, but also everybody around it that becomes part of a certain family, because that gives you the ability to go the extra mile. So there are examples enough out there, but it means that you need to be open for them again and understand that they are there, and that the willingness to go the extra mile is not going to be driven by financial incentives that will get you only so far. The real thing is that people are willing to go the real extra mile, not for the incentive, but for you.
I love that that kind of brings it full circle to something we started this conversation about, which is this idea of both building knowledge of your internal relations within your business, the shop floor, understanding what actually matters. And then the external relations of building community with the people that you are working with, that yes, are on the other side. And I think that is something that is become a huge problem in legal, especially corporate legal departments, which tend to be overloaded with work, and they end up becoming very tactical. They end up doing everything via email, maybe not because they want to, but they just have no time. And if the software can help with that, great. But I think strategically thinking about how you do work and why you do work can help with that as well. And if that means that legal departments get the opportunity to actually build better relations, I think you're going to see both more meaning in their work, but also just less work fundamentally and a better relationship with everything they do. And I think that is something that hopefully lawyers listening into this can take home, which is stop thinking so tactically about everything and start thinking more holistically about what you're doing and why, because I think it'll give you better opportunities and more meaning in your work. I do want to ask you, because I know as one of your companies is CAT-CM, and structurally what you are trying to teach and provide guidance on is a different way to go about building your contract pipeline, how you do work. Can you just touch on that for a little bit?
Yeah, of course. Thanks. Let me start that a bit outside of CAT-CM, but one of the core critical processes in any organizations that usually fails, especially in legal department, is something called resource allocation management. And that means that you need to have an overview on what's happening, what might be happening, that you have a prognosed percentage of availability. And so people being 100% billable is completely ridiculous, because that means that when somebody calls, you don't have time. So I always believe plan for the downtime as well. So that's resource allocation management. Now, if you look at it from a contract management perspective, as I said earlier, it's always about what you want to achieve and not what you want to buy or what you want to sell. It's about what you want to achieve. That means that there's somebody in your organization with the right level and the right authority that needs to achieve that. That's not somebody in legal. It's usually somebody in the business. They need to achieve something. And that achieving something is usually embodied within two steps, if you look at it upward. One is the mission and vision you want to realize as your organization, and the others are the rules and regulations you need to adhere to. And these two together give you an organizational objective. And your organizational objective, you can then translate into contract objectives and in the end to contractual performance. Always top down, never bottom up. If you start thinking that way, that means that, for instance, the considerations typically change in a contractual approach. So I find a lot of contracts where the considerations are like, hey, I'm company E, A, F, G, and the other one is company X, Y, and Z. And together we are going to do this because they want to buy this and we want to sell that. Okay, tells me nothing about what you want to achieve, what the true objective is. So start with thinking in the objective. That also means that then business accountability becomes perfectly clear. If there's no business owner, then there's no need for a contract. And if nobody wants to assume the accountability of the end result of the contract, which is never somebody from legal, don't spend any time on it. It's a waste. So accountability is where it all starts. And that's what we teach organizations. Get this structure, get your accountability in place, understand the roles of procurement and sales and contract management and commercial management during the entire contract life cycle. Decide on who takes which responsibility, which is a lower level than accountability. Then decide which departments are at which moment in time mandatory consulted. There's a compliance department. When they need to be involved, in which step? In the requirement phase, in the execution phase, what they need to do. These are all frameworks that if you understand the process of a contract, the life cycle of a contract, you can actually identify who needs to do what at which moment in time. And then legal is no longer driving that, because contract creation is done under the accountability of somebody in the business, and usually somebody from procurement in sales, having the responsibility to execute it as a project and then go to legal for the right stuff. Once you go into contract execution, it either becomes contract management or commercial management or customer success or whatever, still under the guidance of somebody being accountable. And that means that legal needs to step in when something happens, and that's something that might be there's a change needed, there is an indemnity, there's not being delivered, or it can all kinds of things. But then legal becomes part of the action that needs to be taken in a certain moment in time, and then they are no longer governing the process. So for me, contract lifecycle management is not a legal function. Legal is a function that sets guidelines, that brings resource capability at certain moments in time in the process, and depending on your corporate policy has either a veto or a non-veto right on certain clauses. And they need to give the business owner with the A of the accountability the advice, yes, you can sign this. These are the risks you're taking. Are you aware of them? Which is a totally different approach than saying you cannot sign that. You are not the referee. You're coaching the business. And if you look at it from that perspective, that means that legal becomes the friend of the business and is no longer the deal prevention team. And that's what we aim for in all staff departments that need to put any kind of thing into the contract lifecycle, being procurement, being sales, because sales is also a staff department. Operations is the execution. They're usually the victim of sales. Either they say, what was sold to us they cannot make, or they're the victim like what was sold we cannot make. It's always the same problem. At the end of the day, then finding these clear roles, these clear responsibilities actually helps organizations spend a lot less time of all kind of people that assume that they have a certain authority, whilst they don't have it. But over time, it has become ingrained in the process. I don't think there are many organizations out there that have in their operational process legal decides. Over years, it has crept in that legal decides. But in the end of the day, legal, compliance, finance, they don't decide. They advise the business, can it be done or not? Is this a smart thing to do or not? Are you aware of the risks? Yes or no? Are you willing to accept the risks? Yes or no? Then please sign on the dotted line. And bringing that transformation is what we aim to get in both the pre and the post award, is that if everybody does their role, understands what they need to do in the process, and then stick to that, then it becomes a way lot easier and you tend to spend a way less time. I mean, I've met some brilliant lawyers that really said, hey, you can sign this. These are the risks you are taking. I don't know your business case. So you should understand that if you take this risk, plot it on your business case, make a decision, which is a total different than you should not do that.
I think this analogy of referee versus coach is really good because too often legal has convinced itself that it is the owner of protector or of the rules, so to speak, instead of helping the business do whatever it does, sell more widgets, right? And if you can change that mentality, frankly, it opens up legal to a much better relationship with the business. And I think, hopefully, the life of a lawyer in how they work, and they can get back to more meaningful, impactful work instead of this very tactical, it's not okay, I don't like that red line, I don't like the period here, the comma there, whatever it might be. Focus on the business, focus on accountability, and you get just different results. So I love that analogy. I think that's a really helpful one for everybody to hear and hopefully take with them and start to apply. As we close today, it's been a fascinating conversation. And as I have with a lot of my guests, I think we could talk for frankly days about all kinds of stuff. And so I can't wait until I have you on again. But I'd like to close these out by just asking you, what would you like our audience to take away from today? A little nugget about where they can go and what they can do.
I think the most important one is a quote that's not from me. There's nothing to fear but fear itself. If you really want to go for it, another quote, just do it. I mean, Don't let yourself be hampered by all kinds of programming that has been put into you. You're not an automation, you're a human being. So don't act as an automation, because then you will be automated. Act as a human, then you won't get automated.
I can't imagine a better way to close out today and this conversation about being more entrepreneurial and the age of AI, which is let's not all be robots. Let's continue to be humans and move forward. So I think that is a perfect place for us to close. And the last thing is, where can people find you?
Well, the best way to find me is actually just go on LinkedIn, because I happen to be quite active in sharing knowledge, because that's one of the other things I believe. I believe that one of the things you should be doing is not hoard knowledge, but spread knowledge, and not hoard opinions, but spread opinions. So that's what I like to do. So there you can find me, and you can ask me any kind of question. And if I don't answer, just send the question again, because I get a lot of emails every now and then. And I'm not that much into having updated LinkedIn in such a way that all the messages come out directly, correctly to me. But hey, that's the best way.
It's an easy place to find you, and I can attest from experience. You are a prodigious writer, and I love learning from you. And so that is a great place to find you. Thanks so much for spending time with me today.
A pleasure.